Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ESU Happy Hour. Today's presentation is the English Pantomime with Jim Stebbings. My name is Elizabeth Bigelow, and I am the manager of branch services at the English Speaking Union. I would first like to give a big thank you to the Cleveland branch, which is sponsoring today's Happy Hour. Ideas for our Happy Hour lectures come from our ESU members and the viewers like you. At the end of this program, you will receive a survey in your email where you are encouraged to share your feedback on tonight's lecture. You are also welcome to share ideas for any upcoming Happy Hour lectures you would like to see. Some other notes about tonight's presentation. There will be a question and answer session at the end. You may submit your questions using the dedicated Q&A and chat modules at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You may submit questions at any point during the presentation. However, do note that questions will be answered in the order that they are received. I'm so pleased to inform you that we have over 150 registrants for tonight's program. And I would also like to give a shout out to the branches with the most registered members tonight. Those branches are Central Florida, New York, and Princeton. And finally, I would like to introduce Bill Kennedy, member of the ESU Happy Hour Committee and president of the ESU Cleveland branch, to start off tonight's program.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. A big thank you from Cleveland. I know this is probably the busiest time of the year for many of us, for all of us. And it's very gratifying that so many of you have given up some of your time to be with us tonight. We had the pleasure of hosting Jim Stebbings here in Cleveland when he was touring as a French speaker back in May, and I had a great time being able to spend time with him, driving him around and showing him a bit of Cleveland. And we talked about the theater in England, and I asked about the pantomime tradition, which I don't think many Americans are familiar with. And he agreed to work on a program, and tonight is it. I'm looking forward to it very much. Again, a big thank you to everyone for being here. My wishes to all of you for a healthy holiday season and a very happy and healthy new year this coming year from the Cleveland branch and from the ESU Happy Hour Committee. Jim will be telling you all about the pantomime tradition. I did go online and looked, and there are at least a dozen different Christmas pantos going on right now in London. It's that time of year when every actor in Britain is guaranteed at least a week's work, even if it's only in the back end of a horse's costume on some stage in some small little village somewhere. But it's something that I wish we had in the United States, and it's a big part of the Christmas tradition and the holiday season in Britain. And here is Jim Stebbings to tell us all about it.
Well, thank you, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are. It's very nice to be asked to do this, and I'm very pleased to be with everyone again. As you can see, I'm sitting by my roaring fire because here in the UK at the moment, we have below zero temperatures. So anyway, I'm going to now share my screen with you, and then there'll be a few things you don't want to see, but eventually we'll get to where we need to get to. I'll bring up my presentation. And hopefully, I'll just adjust the size of the image there. I think that's where we need it to be. So I'm assuming you're all there and ready for me. And so here we go. Oh, yes, it is the English pantomime, this unique form of theatrical entertainment, which traditionally has become part of Christmas for many families across the UK and perhaps beyond. Though perhaps we should say straight away that this vital element of the English season, Christmas season, although it's part of this season, The pantomime itself has no content in itself that has any connection with Christmas. And whilst we call it the English pantomime, its origins, in fact, lie beyond the UK. Though now only appearing at Christmas season in its earlier form, pantomime was played at each of the 4 seasons of the year. In this age, the presentation of a pantomime at the other 3 seasons would seem very strange to a modern audience. And so our audience is assembled, and they're already here to have a fair idea of what they're expecting to find, though they have little idea of the history behind the pantomime that they're about to see, the contents, the characters, and the traditions which form the basis of what they are about to witness and about which I'm talking to you. So let's raise the curtain, get the audience settled, and off we go. So what is pantomime? Well, maybe we look no further than the word itself for some clues, at least in its early form, because in its elements, it is telling us that it is, or at least was, all like pandemic, all performed in mime, no spoken word. The story or action told entirely by contortions of the body and face, a technique so memorably used in more modern times in Europe by France's mime artist Marcel Marceau, himself an admirer of the pantomime, and in the US by your own Greg Goldston, who worked with Marceau for 20 years. Although now performed not in mime, the original absence of the spoken word, which accentuated facial and body expression, is still evident in pantomime performance today. Today's younger audience, many of whom will be experiencing live theatre for the first time in their lives, now expect spectacle, song, dance, slapstick comedy, topical satire, cross-dressing, and audience participation, and for their accompanying adults, some saucy innuendo. But that's jumping ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to its origins. Actually, I have seen the history of pantomime described as messy and even confusing, since its elements emerged across several countries in a haphazard pattern. In its present form, it has been described as a unique English form of traditional entertainment, but actually it has origins in other parts of ancient Europe over many centuries. And although elements can still be traced back to its early concepts, to the man in the street, such continental connections would seem unlikely and obscure, and probably unimportant to him. Now, mime as a dramatical performance existed in Greece in the 5th century, with works by Epicharmus, described by Socrates as the Prince of Tragedy. He wrote around 50 comedies, including, expressed here in English, the simple country dweller or clodhopper or country bumpkin, based on Greek mythology. As we shall see later, this type of character still features in panto today. During the reign of Augustus, starting in 63 BC, the Romans introduced pantomimus, a non-speaking dancer who performed dramatic scenes, acting all the characters in the story using a succession of masks, which accentuated body movement and other gestures. The entertainment also sometimes included some music produced by a chorus, but posture and gesture was a large part of his armory. These productions are said to have had a preoccupation with vice and suggestions of sexual acts on stage, and even the actual execution of prisoners on stage. Such performers could later be found across the Roman Empire, and the most successful ones won favors with the emperors at the time. This is a typical venue for a Roman pantomime, theatres which the Romans built across Europe and North Africa. This one, I believe, is in Sobrata in Libya, which I have visited in one of my working visits there. And so we leap forward to 16th century Italy, and we find Commedia Aurita and Commedia dell'arte, the latter now accepted as the true ancestor of pantomime. Commedia dell'arte fused clowning, acrobatics, dance, music, farce and love stories into one production, with well-recognized standard characters such as Il Capitino, who appeared in a mask with an accentuated and distinguishing nose, said actually to be a phallic symbol. He was portrayed as a braggart, using bravado and excessive manliness to hide his true cowardly nature. This is thought to be the Italian view of their enemy at that time, the Spanish. He is the ancestor of the villain who is still part of pantomime today, usually hindering the young heroine of the particular story from attaining her true young love. Today, his equivalent is usually greeted with boos from the audience, to which he will return a hiss or a snarl. More of that later. 17th century introduces us to Pantolini, a mischievous, foolish old man who appears in red with an exaggerated codpiece within his pantaloons. He's described as the oldest of the old in Shakespeare's As You Like It speech, All the World's a Stage, where there is a reference to the lean and slippered pantaloon. He was often played as the cruel father of Columbine, the innocent young female character, the type of character that still features today, usually abused by her father and her mother, or one or the other, and the family, and may be pursued by the older man, but ultimately to be rescued by her young hero. Note the coloured patchwork featured in her costume, of which we shall see more. By the 17th century, this originally Italian form of entertainment had travelled across Europe, first into France, and it introduces us to the slapstick, literally two pieces of hinged wood with which the aggressive holder would make a slapping sound of part of his threatening behaviour. So what we still refer to as slapstick comedy comes into use, taken up in England by the treatment of Judy in the Punch and Judy shows at fairs and similar. Punch and Judy still seen today, especially in traditional English seaside entertainments. In fact, in passing, it's said that Punch and Judy presentations have common features to the pantomime, not just the slapstick you see Punch holding on the left, but also the threatening creatures that frequently appear in both, which I shall refer to later as the skins parts. During its transition in France, the former Italian entertainment also added arlecchino, in French harlequin, or in English as we know it, with the added H, of course, harlequin. He is a peasant with magical powers, his patchwork costume representing his rustic, patched up background of the country bumpkin, gullible but clever. On the right, a portrait by Cézanne from 1888. He performs acrobatic tricks. Harlequin is the name used to describe a multicolored bird in France. The harlequin costume, designed later, developed further with the addition of other colors representing the mood or state of mind of the wearer. Red representing anger, yellow representing jealousy, not green at that time, blue representing love, mauve being faithfulness, orange for happiness, and black for magic. We still refer to black magic. The wearer would point to a colour with his stick on his entry, thus conveying to the audience his mood or state of mind. Black, in fact, indicating that by black magic he can't be seen by the other characters on stage. Harlequin was frequently played as the intended lover of Columbine. It also introduced Pierrot or Pedroline, Little Peter, a comic servant of Pantaloon, his face whitened with flour. He was played as a stupid and awkward country bumpkin in ill-fitting clothes. In the 19th century, the Pierrot and the female Pierrette became more sentimental and romantic characters. They actually acquired an independent identity of themselves outside pantomime, and in the 19th and early 20th century, they appeared in performing groups at English Victorian seaside venues. By the 17th century, this form of entertainment had arrived in Britain and is known as harlequinade in this London theatre, which is regarded as the birthplace of English pantomime as we know it today. The Lincoln Inn Fields Theatre, built on a site that had earlier been a tennis court. Not tennis as we know it today, but an indoor game called real tennis, royal tennis played indoors. The Lincoln Inn Fields Theatre being the first pantomime in England to have the proscenium arch and with movable scenery. And here we're going to meet who is a man who is to become known as the father of English pantomime, a man called John Rich, who played the Harlequin, still played in mime, appearing spectacularly out of a lake, out of a fire, or out of an egg. Rich went on to own the theatre, and in 1728 successfully produced the Beggar's Opera there, which earned him a great deal of money, with which he built another theatre nearby, demolishing Lincoln Inn Fields in 1748. This is now the site of the Royal College of Surgeons. Rich's new theatre was the Theatre Royal, Covent Garden. John Rich played a dancing mute based on the Harlequin, and he played it from 1717 to 1760 under the stage name of John Lunn. Now the English start to add our own ingredients, including such special effects as cannon shots, animals, and illusions. The theatre, which was the Theatre Royal Covent Garden, is now the Royal Opera House Covent Garden, and it's ironical indeed that the Royal Opera House is now the home and symbol of high art, yet it has spawned what became and is regarded still as a low art form, or the art form for the common masses. Performances were still in mime, since under the English Theatres Licensing Act of 1737, only theatres awarded a King's Charter were allowed to use the spoken word. However, this was repealed by the Theatres Act of 1843, which allowed more scope in the theatre, including speech and music, although still regulated by the Lord Chamberlain, who was charged with examining the content and maintaining public morals. This relaxation spawned the era of the music halls, which in turn would bring changes to the pantomime. Incidentally, the 1843 Act remained in force until repealed by the Theatres Act of 1968, and which allowed the rock musical Hair, with its frontal nudity, to open on the first day of it coming into effect in September 1968. Meanwhile, back in France, in 1697, Charles Perrault had conceived his French Mother Goose fairy tales, tales and stories of the past with morals, tales of Mother Goose, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Puss in Boots, and Red Riding Hood, each with a moral. Red Riding Hood, for instance, being a warning to young women of walking alone in the woods. Snow White originated a little later out of the tales of the German brothers Grimm. These 6 stories I have mentioned have become the basis of the majority of English pantomimes today. 6 of the 8 or so stories that were most commonly the basis of many pantomimes today, but having in fact developed as fairy tales in other European lands. So far, therefore, the stories now developed by Rich in England have their genesis in Greece, Italy, France, and even Spain, and not in England. Frenchman Charles Perrault used this chateau in the Loire Valley as his model for the castle he envisaged in Sleeping Beauty, still the kind of model of the castles used today when a romantic or perhaps an austere castle is required, not only in pantomime. And in England in 1781, Robinson Crusoe was added to the list of stories used for the pantomime, including Man Friday, who was derived from the Harlequin, and a female representing the former Columbine. It now included songs and interludes, and its home has now moved a few yards in London's Covent Garden to the Drury Lane Theatre, and productions by Brinsley Sheridan, author of The Rivals and School for Scandal. As well as the Harlequin equivalent in Man Friday, it included a pantaloon-type character, the Harlequin hero, Columbine the heroine. It also contained what was becoming an essential part of various English pantomimes, knockabout comedy, a widow, savages, but of course always a happy ending. But now, around the end of the 18th century, another step change or addition here in England, the clown or clownish figure becoming the successor to the Harlequin, most famous by this man, Joseph Grimaldi, Joey, the now familiar name used for a clown. His father was an Italian dancer who made his way to England via France, who married a dancer in England, and he became father to son Joseph at the age of 60. So at the age of 2, young Joseph was to become a part of his father's act, playing the part of a monkey at the end of a chain by which his father swung him around. On one occasion, the chain broke and Joseph ended up in the audience. As he grew, Joseph Jr. developed the image of the clown out of the Harlequin. In 1806, he appeared as the new Harlequin Mother Goose in London and introduced the white face and bright cheeks that we still associate with the clown today. Crippled by the various injuries he sustained over 17 years as a clown, Grimaldi was forced by his injuries to retire aged only 45. For his last appearance, he was actually carried onto the stage. In England, where clowns are now largely only seen in the circus, we still call clowns Joeys, a remaining tribute to Joseph Grimaldi. He died at the age of 59, a total cripple. He had a son, Joseph III, following in the footsteps of his grandfather and father, but became an alcoholic and lawless, and died at the age of 30, insane and in poverty. So these two Josephs epitomize the tragic figure of the clown, ill-treated and a source of ridicule. A measure of Grimaldi's fame and the admiration felt for him is that Charles Dickens wrote his memoirs, originally under Dickens' pen name of Boz. Clowns or Joeys are still treasured in England, and each year for the last 70 years there is a special church service in London remembering Grimaldi and attended by hundreds of Joeys from across the land who come in their traditional costume and, as you can see, on some unconventional transport. Just concentrating on the clown for a moment, Grimaldi's nearest successor in the 20th century was an Italian named Charlie Caroli, who came across the continent to England just before World War II, appearing in circus and pantomime, appearing along the way in Munich to the admiring Adolf Hitler, who presented him with a watch. Caroli was threatened with internment on the outbreak of World War II in Britain because of his Italian background, and he famously and ceremoniously threw his watch into the sea off England's Blackpool Pier to prove his allegiance to Britain. He was subsequently described as a British comic pantomimist and the Prince of Clowns. He appeared at Blackpool for 42 years, getting us soaking almost every day. But back to the 1840s. Although the Harlequin and the Joey had now become largely extinct in their original forms, they still formed the basis for the knockabout slapstick characters that still dominated the panto then and even today. In the 19th century, the development and opening of theatres around the country allowed the panto to thrive and to be brought to the masses across the UK. Theatres now had stage facilities that added even more spectacle, such as the trap door that enabled the clown character to make a dramatic appearance or disappearance, as the case may be. This was particularly important that since the 17th century has been termed in pantomime the transformation scene, the point at which a fairy queen or fairy godmother transforms the setting of the play from its original simple country or cottage setting into something spectacular. Such transformation still exists in pantomime today, such as the transformation of Cinderella's coach and attire with which she appears at the Prince's Ball, or the growing of the beanstalk that grows spectacularly and allows Jack to reach the giant's castle. An especially notable added feature was what's called the diorama, a continuous backcloth 5 or 6 times the width of the stage, which was rolled to give the effect of movement. Excuse me. Later adopted by Hollywood to create movement, especially in the film musicals of the 1930s and 40s, Easter Parade, for instance. Others were made vertically to stimulate flight. This technique is still used today when, for instance, Jack is climbing his beanstalk. Other features, such as huge water tanks, were sometimes built to enable a lake or waterfall to feature, especially at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. London's Theatre Royal, Drury Lane is now the home to the great musicals, but was formerly the theatre where King Charles II had seen, met, and fell in love with Nell Gwynn, the orange seller at the theatre, who had become an actress, and later the King's mistress, bearing him 2 of his 11 illegitimate children. A story for another day, perhaps. Incidentally, it was at Drury Lane Theatre that Rodgers and Hammerstein's Oklahoma opened in 1947 to an enthralled audience, which included a royal party of King George VI, with his eldest daughter Elizabeth in the party, together with a young man named Philip Mountbatten. The original scenery of the British production is still stored in Drury Lane. However, I mustn't deviate. Back to the pantomime. The Victorians loved technology, continually developing new technical transformation techniques and using gaslight and limelight. The latter, light literally made from the burning of lime. We still refer to people being in the limelight even today. What you're hearing there is thunder that is made from rolling cannonballs along a roughly hewn trough above the heads of the audience. This particular piece of a basic sound equipment still exists in London's His Majesty's Theatre, called Her Majesty's Theatre until September this year. As I've said, the 1843 Act allowed more freedom, and the dialogue became a natural and important part of the production. This man wrote Drury Lane pantos for 37 years, all of which had a moral tone. A further notable advancement occurred in 1883 production of Cinderella, the first without the now dated Harlequin, and instead the great music hall stars of the time were introduced. Music hall celebrities which the masses had perhaps seen and heard in their music hall, and who were expected at some point in the panto production to sing or perform the songs they were famous for. Music hall star Dan Leno became the first male playing the female, known as Dame Trot, sometimes also referred to as Widow Twankey, this being the first great English addition to what had gone before. Leno was a lean Dame Trot, but thereafter and today she's normally a rotund and aging female, playing, for instance, Cinderella's mother in the pantomime of that name. And to cross-dressing became into prominence in other roles too, the ugly sisters and in Cinderella, of course. Now, we should distinguish between the female impersonators such as Leno with Dame Trot and what is now called drag. There was no intention for the audience to be fooled into thinking that these characters were anything but males interpreting females, perhaps women as seen by men. It added to the sense of fun. Incidentally, the name Trot was already in use in English slang to denote an old hag, and Widow Twankey's name was derived from a low-grade tea imported from the Twankay region of China. Drinking Twankay tea immediately put you into a low social class. Leno went to great lengths to add spectacle to his act, even allowing rats to crawl over his body as part of his act. These performers now reached out to the audience and what we call across the lights, encouraging the audience to enter into exchanges, very much part of what we expect today. And although Leno was the lean dame, the image of the dame subsequently was an oversized, aging female. It's said that this image was in fact a send-up of Queen Victoria, seen by men in the latter days of her reign as a rather irrelevant fat old lady in an age which was actually one of male dominancy. In 1879, Augustus Harris, manager of Drury Lane Theatre and aged 28, added further spectacle with a lavish production of Sinbad the Sailor with a cast of 500, all on stage together in one scene apparently. Harris is known as the father of modern pantomime, and this is his memorial set in the wall of the Drury Lane Theatre. Even our famous old friend William Schwenk Gilbert of Gilbert and Sullivan fame had got into the act before his time with Sullivan, writing a number of pantos which for one time was his bread and butter, for which he was paid £60 a time. Now the introduction of the female music stars into the pantomime, the first being Marie Lloyd, a musical act, eldest of 11 children. She had a reputation of being raunchy, one of her famous songs being "A little of what you fancy does you good." As you see from the picture, the pantomimes always then, as now, included an animal played by an actor in what I referred to earlier as the skins role. Here, Dick Whittington's cat. The actor playing the cat in this picture became typecast and in demand because of his excellence in the part. It required great agility and skill to play such a part, as he was expected to perform all kinds of tricks and gymnastics, including walking down a staircase on all fours. Not so easy when you think about it. I mentioned earlier the adult innuendo that is still included in the modern audiences, unnoticed by innocent children, but appreciated by the astute adults, members of the family. This Mary Lloyd song being perhaps an early example. I'll leave you to read and interpret that as you will. The female-male impersonator was also established now in the 1890s, and this woman, Vesta Tilley, seen here as Dick Whittington, was the highest earning woman in England. She was also a star of the vaudeville circuit in the USA and toured over there with you on 6 occasions. Tilly was a short form of Matilda, and Vesta was a make of English matches at the time, which still exist. She was paid $600 a week in the USA in 1894. At the time of the outbreak of World War I, she was termed England's greatest recruiting sergeant, singing patriotic songs whilst walking through the audience, encouraging young men to volunteer. She went to live in Monte Carlo, but died on a visit to England in 1952. And so into the 20th century and the modern era. By now, pantomime is established as an entertainment across the provinces as well as in London. These earlier posters from Leeds in the north of England. In the capital, London's Palladium Theatre had now become the established venue for Dick Whittington in 1914 and Cinderella in 1950, and for many years thereafter. So, what are the essential elements today? Well, the traditional story or plot. The principal boy, played by a girl. The dame or dames. Fairy magic. Young lovers. Slapstick comedy. The nasty character to boo at. The animal skin part. The audience participation with music and dance, and of course, always a happy ending. To illustrate some of these traditional elements today, let's consider these in the context of one of the most popular, and particularly this year I've noticed, a pantomime, Jack and the Beanstalk. The traditional plot, said to be a story dating back several centuries to the days of King Alfred, the first printed version being published in 1730 as the story of Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean. We meet Jack Trot, the principal boy, played by a female, here played in modern times by female Bonnie Langford. We meet the dame, the pantaloon part, and the adult innuendo. I'll let you read that exchange for yourself. And of course, the skins role, Jack's cow. In other pantos, frequently a horse. Many a young actor has found himself or herself asked to play one of the two occupants of those skins, the one losing the toss playing the rear end, starting his or her theatrical life at the bottom, so to speak. In my time performing, I appeared twice with a horse. Fortunately, the more lucky role of actually riding on the back of the unfortunate back end. There's also the evil character in Jack and the Beanstalk, the giant, to whom we can all hiss and boo. Perhaps we might feel some sympathy for him in the happy ending. His famous and always repeated line in Jack and the Beanstalk is, "He fi fo fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." Audience participation, still a vital part of the pantomime. In many a theatrical performance, It's said that the performance is only as good as the audience, but it is essentially so in pantomime, where the audience is encouraged, indeed required, to participate in the traditional way. Early on, the audience members are taught to shout a welcome each time the comic comes onto the stage. Hiya, kids! Hiya, Jack! Or to boo or hiss the villain, who will similarly snarl back at them. They will warn the principal boy when the villain approaches. He's behind you! Or when the ghost or some beast approaches. They will argue with the dame. At some stage, they will be encouraged to join the singing of a silly song, usually the words shown on a large screen. They will usually then become competitive, with the audience split into two halves, each half under the direction of one of the principals, competing for the loudest rendition of the song. The children may even be invited on stage to participate. And of course, when all the difficulties are resolved, the audience must cheer at the end at the happy ending. Now here's a typical silly song, which is frequently sung with Jack and the Beanstalk.
However, there is one conundrum that has always perplexed me. It's a puzzle I just don't understand. Why does a brown cow give white milk when it only eats green grass? That's the burning question. Let's have your suggestion. You don't know, I don't know. Don't you feel an asshole? Why does a brown cow give white milk when it only eats green grass? Oh, a bit louder than that, maybe a bit faster. Why does a brown cow give white milk when it only
I hope
eats
you're all
green
joining in.
grass? Very good, that's the burning question. Let's have your suggestion. You don't know, I don't know. Don't you feel an asshole? Why does a brown cow give white milk when it only eats green grass? 10 times faster.
I think we've probably had enough of that. Jack's climbing of the beanstalk, giving opportunity for some spectacular imagery and stage settings, perhaps using that vertical diorama I mentioned. It has now become tradition too for most pantos to include spots for children from a local dance school to be included at some point, known as the sunbeams. Also ensures the attendance of parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. Very cunning. In modern times, London's famous and beautiful London Palladium, with its huge auditorium of 2,300, has become the mecca of the London panto scene. Incidentally, just a little deviation, it was at the London Palladium in World War II that Irving Berlin brought his great show, This is the Army, and here being introduced to King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. Here are the various posters of the productions at the Palladium since World War II. Many names very familiar to me, and perhaps one or two to you, being the pop stars or entertainers that the public flocked to see, just as they did in those music hall years. In the bottom right-hand corner, one of the lesser used stories, Old King Cole, starring in that particular production an English comedian, the late Charlie Drake. His catchphrase, "Hello, my darlings," the catchphrase the audience expected to hear. As a short man under 4 feet in height, he sometimes cheekily delivered that catchphrase, "Hello, my darlings," as he was clutched into the breast of the dame being addressed. We might say that the English pantomime certainly has a stamp of royal approval, since the young princesses Elizabeth and Margaret took part in pantomime in their childhoods each year. On the right, Elizabeth seemingly playing the principal boy. Panto dame remains an important role in panto. No panto I've ever seen not featuring a dame in some role. Here, well-loved English comedians Ronnie Corbett and John Inman became famous each year in that role. A few American actors have appeared in an English pantomime, including Mickey Rooney, who played the part of Baron Hardup, a modern version of the original Pantaloon, in Cinderella in an English provincial theatre in 2007 at the age of 87. When Pamela Anderson appeared as the Genie of the Lamp in the pantomime Aladdin in London in 2009, she arrived sailing in, of course, on a suspended surfboard, referring to her role in the TV series Baywatch, or dating back to what had originally been expected of those music hall stars. Sir Ian McKellen, British Shakespearean actor, shown here in Hamlet, this year is in Mother Goose, a tour during the festive season, and now at the age of 83. It's plain to see that pantomime is considered an important art form even for an eminent actor. A little story here. Apparently, another famous Shakespearean actor appeared in pantomime, but insisted that he showed some of his Shakespearean experience. So he walked to the front of the stage and delivered, "To be or not to be, that is the question." To which the audience replied, "Oh, no, it's not." To which he replied, "Oh, yes, it is," and so on. You get the idea. Another story, somewhat amusing in a similar way, is about an unfortunate dame who became unwell during a performance, and after the interval, the manager of the theatre had the task of telling his audience that she, or should I say he, would not be appearing because she was ill. To which the audience, of course, replied, "Oh, yes, she will," etc. They thought it part of the action to what they were expected to respond. I mentioned that the panto is usually a child's first experience of the theatre, and so it was for me. My first, now somewhat vague memory of seeing Peter Pan in my local professional theatre, I guess around 1947, the spectacle of characters flying over my head. Perhaps it was this that started my subsequent lifelong love of theatre. By the way, it was American producer Charles Fruman who first produced J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan in London in the Duke of York's Theatre in 1904, named in the poster on the right. For those who were present for my presentation, the loss in 1915 of the Lusitania, may recall that Frohman was a victim of the sinking of that ship. Here in Norwich this year, where I live, we will be treated, oh, I'm not sure I want to use that word now, to Jack and the Beanstalk. Now, whereas formerly it was traditional for the pantomime to open on the 26th of December, what we call Boxing Day here in the UK, it now opens earlier, sometimes running beyond January. This one opened last weekend in Norwich. It's estimated that this creates a guaranteed and essential part of the commercial theatre's income, expected to be around 30% of the theatre's annual income, vital to the theatre's survival over the rest of the year. My wife and I attended last weekend since we had not seen a professional production post-COVID. Sad to report, it seems that modernization of the production was not to my liking, not just because of the music now, which is in the modern idiom, but the special effects in what I earlier described as the transition scene are now done with technical images projected onto a screen, rather than the clever mechanical devices that the Victorians introduced, such as the diorama. Also, the traditional two-person cow, now played by one upright person and in a cow costume, which you can see on the left here. Jack was played by a young male instead of by the principal boy. For me, a traditionalist, it was sad to see the old elements replaced by technology, and for the skins part to be lost in its most amusing and traditional form. However, it seemed most of the audience enjoyed it, however, with much shouting across the lights and much interchange. But I discover that panto is indeed part of the scene over there in the USA. The artist shown here George Washington Lafayette Fox, apparently inspired by Grimaldi. He died in 1877 following a fall on stage in 1875, having played 1,200 performances of Humpty Dumpty. And I believe pantomime continues in New York at the Freud Theatre, also in Houston, Melbourne, Pennsylvania, and Pasadena. And I believe the Lithgow family productions are continued at venues on the American West Coast. Maybe someone can inform me if I've got that correct. So, ladies and gentlemen, my story is told. And I announce now that this is the end of my presentation of the historical pantomime, your answer should be, oh, no, it's not. But I'm going to have to say, oh, yes, it is. But being Christmas, I want to leave you with this wish. So I'm going to stop sharing, and maybe there are some questions, or maybe there are some comments or some pieces of information. So
Wonderful.
are you
Yes.
receiving me?
Yes, thank you so much for that excellent presentation, Jim. Just as a reminder to everyone, if you have a question that you would like to pose to Jim, please feel free to go ahead and do so now via the Q&A and chat buttons at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We only have time for just a few questions tonight, so make sure you get those in. We're going to go ahead and start off with a question for Jim. This question, this person is asking, why do you think pantomime has such an enduring appeal in the UK?
Well, it certainly has. And I would say that there are more productions and everyone now feels that they have to go to panto as part of their Christmas. When I was smaller, going to the panto didn't happen for everyone. But now every village, every town, everyone seems to feel that they should go to a pantomime as part of Christmas. So part of the answer to that is it's now part of Christmas. The other thing, I think that it still appeals to our sense of humor. It still contains all those elements I've described. It allows the participation of the audience, which is somewhat unique. I think it's still alive. It's changing all the time. As I told you, one I saw, not for me, had technical changes. So it's still very much alive, still appeals to everyone, but is now an essential part of Christmas.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Carolyn Spedden, who is a member of our Washington, D.C. branch. And her question is, when did the panto become associated with Christmas?
When did it become associated with Christmas? That's a good question. And I'm not sure I know the answer, to be honest. As I told you, there were 4 seasons originally. It would appear, I would think, and I would have to research this, I honestly don't know. I think probably around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. It's been certainly part of Christmas in my lifetime. So I would think probably about turn of the 19th to 20th century, but I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I will find out. Hello? Are we still in contact?
Hello.
Hello?
Hi, this is Karen Karpwich. I don't know what happened to the rest of our team, but I see that there are a couple of more questions here, which I can help with. With children.
Hello?
Oh, go
Can you
ahead.
hear us, Jim?
Yeah. I kind of pitched in, Beth, but go ahead. You disappeared for a while. Hello?
Hello, I can hear, I think it's you, Karen, but I
Hello,
can't hear anyone else.
Hear me? Hello?
We can hear you now.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
so sorry. We're having some connection problems on our end, and unfortunately Zoom just kicked us out, but we are back. And if you may indulge us in one last question, Jim, before we close out, we have a question from an anonymous attendee, and they're wondering, what is the history of Boxing Day?
Well, there's more than one explanation given. Generally, the most accepted view, I believe, or the one that I tend to think is the right one, is that on Christmas Day, the people working downstairs, if we talk about downstairs and upstairs, they worked very hard at Christmas. And on Boxing Day, what was not eaten on Christmas Day was boxed up and given to the staff so that they could enjoy their Christmas on the day after Christmas with the leftovers from the day before, all presented to them in boxes. That's the explanation that sticks in my mind, and the one that I like to think is probably true.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer, Jim. And thank you to everyone who has attended this webinar and who has submitted a question. Unfortunately, we cannot get to everyone's question, but thank you so much for coming. And this now ends the session of question and answers, and we're now going to turn it over to the ESU Executive Director, Karen Karpwich, to close us out for this evening.
Anyway, I do want to thank you, James. And as I mentioned before in the rehearsal, you're one of our favorites now. You've done a couple of our happy hours, and also we've taken you on the road with our Evelyn Wrench Speakers program. So please help. Thank you. And you're a wonderful member of the family. I want to thank Bill Kennedy and the Cleveland branch for putting this together. And one tidbit of information, the New York branch of the ESU has a group called the ESU Players, which is a small theater group, which comprises of a lot of amateur performers, some of our former employees like Josh Compel Gonzalez, and it also includes some of our students from our immigrant program. And right before the pandemic, we had done a Christmas party at the office with British schools and universities. And Louise Muse, who's a longtime member of the ESU, produced a pantomime of Jack and the Beanstalk with all our performers. So we ourselves have a history of pantomime. I just wanted to mention that because the group is still around today. They made it through the pandemic and they're back in person in New York. So I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And thank you all again for participating in this program, which is totally curated by our branches. It's kind of a bittersweet time because Elizabeth Bigelow, who's been our producer on this program for a while, is leaving the ESU. So we want to thank Elizabeth Bigelow and all the work she's done with regard to the program. And we wish you well, Elizabeth, you'll be missed. And I just wanted to mention that our next happy hour will be January the 11th, Wednesday, January the 11th. And to bring in the new year, we are going to have a discussion on port wine. So I think we talk a lot about the drinks for our happy hour. This is the first time we're doing an entire program around drinking. So unfortunately, we can't share port with you in person, but perhaps you should bring your own. Anyway, I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I hope to see you all in 2023. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.